Shalom and welcome to Reaching Higher, a podcast designed for Jewish children where we embark on exciting journeys through interesting and enjoyable subjects. I'm your host, Atara, and together, let's jump in to the wonders that await us. Hi everyone, and welcome to our newest episode of Reaching Higher. I am sure so many of you have been to museums. There are so many different kinds of museums all around the world. Some museums teach us about a specific event in history, like the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., or some teach us about history as a whole, like the Museum of Natural History in New York City. Others teach us about a person, like the Begin Museum in Yerushalayim, about the life of Menachem Begin. Other museums can teach us about art, like the Guggenheim Museum in New York. There are also science museums, like the one in Beersheba or Yerushalayim, or in New Jersey. I've heard kids say, I don't like going to museums, but I think that means you haven't been to the right ones. Did you know that there's a museum in Cholon that can give you the experience of a blind person? Or in New York City, there's a museum of slime. In Israel, there's also a museum teaching you all about illusions. There are really museums for every single thing, and I hope this summer you can find a museum that interests you wherever you are in the world. To start us off, we asked some kids, what is your favorite museum?
Hi, my name is Yitzchak. My favorite museum is the Madatak in Haifa, the Science Museum, because I like science.
Hi, my name is Yael, and my favorite museum is the Illusion Museum.
Hi, my name is Chugfia. My favorite museum is Children Museum.
In honor of the 3 weeks, we wanted to discuss a topic related to the beit hamikdash. Who better to discuss the topic of the kelim in the beit hamikdash, particularly the chatzozrot, the silver trumpets, with us, other than the Musuem Guy. That's really his name, the Musuem Guy. I would like to welcome Nachliel as he teaches us how he got the name the Musuem Guy, and more importantly, all about the silver trumpets, the chatzozrot from the beit hamikdash. Hi, Nachliel. Welcome to Reaching Higher. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us where you're from and where you live now.
Hi, Atara. Thanks for inviting me. This is really to be able to do this. I am from the old city of Jerusalem, the Rova, as it's known, the quarter. I currently live in Gush Etzion. I lived in Pnei Kedem, which is East Gush Etzion. Not as famous as Efrat, Elazar, Neve Daniel, but we get to see the Dead Sea, so that's very special.
It's so nice to meet you. Can you explain to us what you do? We know you're called the Musuem Guy. How did you get that title? What does that mean?
Well, the name came a lot after I started doing what I do, which is basically I'm kind of like a renegade teacher. Instead of teaching in the classroom, I try to bring students into the museum and to run around the museum and have fun and to give creative interpretations to statues and paintings and to try to look at them differently. And through that, to try to connect to our past and to learn about archaeology, stones, clay, pots and pans, and ancient weapons and coins and treasures, and to try to see how they connect to us. So by trying to connect to the artifacts, by looking at them and trying to imagine how did ancient people use them, or how did it impact their world? How did their lives look? We try to connect to the past.
So you use words like archaeology and artifacts. Can you explain to us, why is archaeology important? Why is finding artifacts important to us?
Imagine you're going to a family meeting of, let's say, close relatives. Let's say first cousins. Some people are even close with their second cousins. Sometimes you're even close with your third cousins. But the farther back you go, the less connection you feel to the family, and sometimes it's hard to understand how exactly are we related. Are our parents our cousins? What's a first cousin? What's a second cousin once removed? It can be a little bit confusing, but I like to look at the past as our close cousins. So I think that archaeology and artifacts is the different things that we find, where archaeology is the study of those artifacts. When you see them in a museum, you have an opportunity to meet your distant cousins, to meet somebody who did things and thought about things that are not that different from us, but yet it was different. And when we see things that are strange, it helps us like think, so why is this strange to us? What do they do that's different than the way we do things? And it opens us up to a whole new world. And I think that that's exciting.
Really interesting to think of the analogy of our cousins, that we're trying to relate to them in a certain way. So I wanted to discuss with you today about the chatzozrot in relation to the 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av. Can you tell us, have they ever found chatzozrot or trumpets from the beit hamikdash?
Oh, wow. Did they actually find them? Not from the Beit HaMikdash. We have found some ancient instruments, but not that I know of as far as the Beit HaMikdash. But we know what the trumpets looked like in the Beit HaMikdash, because there's a picture of them that was made by the Romans just a few years after the Churban, after the destruction.
Okay, so that's the chatzozrot from the Arch of Titus. Are there any other artifacts?
We also have a coin from the Bar Kokhba revolt, which is like 60 something years after the Churban, that shows the chatzozrot. So those are two artifacts that relate to the Churban, where we actually see pictures of them.
Could you describe a little bit what they look like? Were they complicated?
They're not that complicated because they're very old chatzozrot. They're not like the modern trumpets that have different notes. It's basically a long horn made out of silver. So we found a few things that relate to that, but I think the most exciting one, before getting into the pictures where you actually see what it looked like, is a piece of the Beit HaMikdash that was found next to the Kotel.
So you mean there was an actual piece of the Beit HaMikdash that fell off? Okay, so what does that have to do with the chatzozrot?
So one of the stones that collapsed, that fell down there, is a stone that was from the corner, from a station where a Kohen or a Levi would stand, and it actually has Hebrew words that any of you can read if you read Hebrew. It's just like today's Hebrew, and it has 2 words and then one word that it's a little bit broken, and it's hard to know exactly how to complete it, but we can guess. So it says lebeit hatkiah. Basically, tki'ah, which means blowing the trumpet, was done on a different part of the temple, and there was a designated spot called Beit Tki'ah. This is the trumpet station. So we found a stone from the temple that says this is where the Kohen or the Levi stood with trumpets. And the broken word is that you can read a lamed, you can read a hey, and then it's either a bet or a chaf. We don't really know, but let's say it's with a bet, it would be lehavdil. So like this, lehavdil ben kodesh lechol, and I'll get into that in a moment, or lehachriz. So lehachriz would be like lehachriz al, to make announcements.
Okay, so this stone fell off where they blew the chatzozrot. So what does this have to do with lehazkir v'lehachriz?
This is a Mishnah in Sukkah, where it says that every Friday there would be trumpets that would be blown in Yerushalayim. And Josephus, who we'll talk about when we get to the Arch of Titus, actually describes this as well, except he says they were blown twice, and the Mishnah says 3 times. But it basically tells us that the chatzozrot were used to tell people it's time to leave your field and start coming back into the city, because soon it's going to be Shabbat. So you start with an early trumpet blast, an early tkiah, and then everybody knows to stop working. And basically, once the 3rd tkiah is there, it's already Shabbat. And we still do this today. You hear in some places they have a siren. In some cities in Israel, you have music playing for a certain amount of time, and either you like the music or you hate the music, but that's why it's there. It's to tell you, get ready for Shabbat. It's almost time to light candles. It's almost time to go to shul. And that's a really interesting thing, that from the time of the temple until today, we still have this practice, even though today we no longer use the chatzozrot to do that. We have technology to do that. But when the Beit HaMikdash was built, you were able to hear the chatzozrot from the south, from the city of David, all the way to the basically the western part of the city, which is the old city today, which is quite incredible for ancient times. So the chatzozrot really were part of daily life and also part of the festivals and the holidays, and as we'll see in the end, also of fast days.
Really interesting. Every time I hear that music from my house, Erev Shabbos, I'm going to be thinking about this and everything we learned about the chatzozrot today. Okay, that's all about the fragment, the piece from the Beit HaTkiyah that fell from the Beit HaMikdash. So what do we know about the chatzozrot themselves? And do we have any idea where they are?
This relates to a bigger question, which has become a bit of a fascination in the past, let's say, 70 years, of where is the golden menorah that's depicted on the Arch of Titus.
Okay, maybe that's a good place to start. So you mentioned it earlier. What exactly is the Arch of Titus?
So the Arch of Titus, when the temple was destroyed, it was Titus, the son of Vespasian, who was the commander at the time. Vespasian was basically proclaimed the emperor. He had to go back to Rome in the middle of the battle and to become the emperor, and he left his son Titus in charge. Now, Titus completed the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, as we know, and he brought a tremendous amount of treasures from Jerusalem and from the temple into Rome. Now, part of that story, we think about it without considering what was going on inside the Roman Empire, what's happening in their politics, what's happening in their economy. But this really is important.
What do you mean by politics and economy?
When I say politics and economy, what I mean is that their government, their kingdom, has a reason for making a big deal about the destruction of Jerusalem, which is a small city in the Middle East. Like, who cares about Jerusalem in the Roman Empire, right? But because the Roman Empire was doing very poorly, they didn't have money, they really needed new leadership who can bring more money into the kingdom so that they can continue building roads and, do what's good for them. They needed more money. And Vespasian came as the savior, as the hero who would save the Roman Empire. And he brought in so much gold and silver from Jerusalem that the price of gold in the entire Roman Empire went down by, I think, a third.
Okay, so there was a huge amount of money and gold in Yerushalayim that Titus took. Okay, keep going.
When Vespasian and then his son Titus and his other son Domitian, basically his dynasty, the Flavian dynasty as they're called, they wanted the Romans to follow them and support them. So they needed to make a big deal about the destruction of Yerushalayim. So they made special coins that show Jerusalem is destroyed, and it says Judea Capta. Judea Capta, meaning Judea, Yehuda, is captured. These are famous coins. They built this big round arena called the Colosseum, and we know that Vespasian built it from the treasure, from the spoils of war, from the treasures that he took from Jerusalem. We actually found that written down there, which is an incredible discovery. It's fairly recent.
Oh, cool. You're mentioning the Colosseum. We actually learned about the Colosseum from my friend David on a previous podcast, but we didn't know that it was built from money from the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so tell us what we know about the arch.
The arch that was built was actually built by Domitian, which is the other brother of Titus, who also became emperor. Now, this archway was built with a picture on one side of Titus riding his horse with his carriage with 4 horses, and the name Nike, which we all know, Nike is actually a goddess of success, of victory. So you see Nike on top of him, like a winged woman, basically supporting him.
Okay, that sounds really cool about Nike. Maybe we'll get to that in a future episode. So tell us what else is on the arch.
And on the other side of the arch, on the inside, is the very famous picture of Roman soldiers carrying the golden menorah from the temple. Now, we all know about the golden menorah. That golden menorah became the symbol of the state of Israel. And if you go to the old city, to the Rova, you'll see that in the main square is a copy of that golden menorah that's just standing there in the middle of the square.
I'm finding this so
we,
interesting because I've never thought about this from the perspective of the Roman Empire, of how they had to explain to the Romans what it was like to how it affected their economy so much, the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash.
No, absolutely. It became a worldwide phenomenon. Like it was not worldwide. It became a world-renowned story. Everybody knew about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, so it kind of made it famous. And I'll say one last thing about the menorah, and then I'll talk about the chatzozrot. Is that perhaps because the menorah became famous because of the Arch of Titus that was made, it shows a picture of Roman soldiers carrying the treasures from Jerusalem into Rome. Now that actually happened. It's described in Josephus, who was a Jewish historian and a Kohen who fought for the Jews, but then became a captive and started writing histories for Titus. He was Titus's basically his personal historian who wrote the histories of the Jewish wars and a lot of other things. So Josephus Flavius Josephus wrote what happened during the procession, and he was there. So he describes how they're carrying the treasures and they're carrying the menorah and they're carrying a Sefer Torah, all to basically show, look what we've done to the rebellious kingdom of of Judah, and look what we're doing for the empire. Now, in the center of that procession on the arch, we show a 7-branched menorah. But what we don't notice is that off to the right, in the front of the procession, is a little golden table, perhaps the shulchan of the Lechem Hapanim, the showbread table, and inside it are 2 trumpets, the 2 chatzozrot. So we don't notice them because the menorah just takes center stage. Now, this is something really interesting, is perhaps because the menorah became so famous, because of the Arch of Titus, the menorah becomes the symbol of Judaism for almost 2,000 years.
So it's so interesting that it's because the way the Romans depicted it on the Arch of Titus, it became the symbol, even though the chatzozrot were also one of the kelim and also inscribed in the arch.
Right, but like everybody has trumpets and tables. It's not exciting, but this weird. It's nothing like the Romans had. They did nothing like this.
Okay, so we talked about the chatzozrot, the Beit HaTkiah stone, the Arch of Titus, but could you tell us before we end off, what do the chatzozrot have to do with fast days?
So the Rambam says something really relevant. He says this in the laws of Ta'aniyot, what to do on a fast day. So he says that there is a mitzvah. This is how he opens his halacha. He says there is a mitzvah from the Torah to use the chatzozrot whenever there is a tragedy for the whole community. Whenever something bad happens to everyone, we need to blow the trumpets, right? That way everybody knows to pray and they know to do tshuva. That's what he says to do. And he says that when we do this properly, Hashem will hear us, will listen to us, and we will be saved. And if we don't, then, and we just say like, nah, this, whatever happened to us, it's just the way of the world. It's not Hashem acting in the world, then things will get worse. So the chatzozrot are used to remind us to do tshuva.
Thank you so much for giving us your time. You taught us so many interesting things. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed this interview with Nachliel and this episode of Reaching Higher. I think it's certainly an episode that you can say, I learned something new. And you know what? I'm curious what you took away and what you learned from this episode with the Musuem Guy and learning all about the chatzozrot. So do us a favor. Let us know what you learned and what you enjoyed. Contact us by email at reachinghigherpodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at reachinghigher. Tell us what you enjoyed and what you liked about it. We can't wait to see you on next week's episode of Reaching Higher.